Hello, my people from the overall show, and as always, welcome to the Friday night storytelling session. We are beginning a very new series of telling stories of different things. We'll be telling you stories about places, about people, about our cities, and all the amazing things that we've been asking for. So keep on watching and keep on looking. Different series and different episodes coming on different stories, and I hope we'll keep on having this amazing and gentleman on the panel with us, always to tell these great stories. So today we begin with the story of animals and how we are related to the animals and how some of these animals started living with us in our communities. Karibu sana.
Asante.
Thank you. Karibu sana for joining us for the show today. And I hope we're going to enjoy this session and people are going to learn a lot from you today.
Thank you.
Asante.
Thank you very much.
So we took you to Mukurweini, to Wajir Nature Park. And remember the video that we are going around and showing you the trees and showing you the birds and even showing one of the trees that we call the tree that served the living God, because the tree was hanging on other trees without roots but still alive. Then you also remember we took you to Jajara waterfalls. So when we talk about all that area, we went to that place courtesy of Jagi Gakunja. Maybe just to start us from that point, the inspiration behind setting up this Wajir Nature Park, what was it?
Interestingly enough, I had my father, and my father was quite elderly because I'm right at the back of the line of a 10-member family. But my father had served in the First World War and also in the Second World War. And he had a lot of stories to tell. And I think one of the things that you find about people who have traveled, it's another type of education.
True.
So one of the things he came up with was planting of trees. He loved trees. So that is something that is a legacy that he left behind, and we copied from him. So what happened is that when my father passed away and my mother passed away, the land that my parents occupied is what became my inheritance.
Okay.
And I didn't know what to do, and I thought the best thing to honor my parents is to continue making it a conservation center. And we tried to reduce the number of the exotic trees and wanted the forest to go back to its original form. So that 20 acres of land now is almost 90% indigenous forest at the moment. But it is very much like giving back. I learned something, when I was looking at land, that although people believe that you can own land, I don't think you can own land. You can only be a trustee of land, because that land goes nowhere. We come and go.
You found it, you
yes,
use it, you leave it.
You leave it, somebody else uses it. So if I take an example of the land that was left by my parents, before I became the trustee, my father owned it in inverted commas. Before him, his father owned it, or some other people owned it. And probably when my time to go comes, my son will claim that he owns it. But the land does not change, it is there. So the point is that you have to see land when you have the responsibility to look after it as a trustee. So I thought that the best thing to do with that particular land is take where my father had reached and add value so that it can be better than where he left it. And one of the things I did was to make sure that I reduced the exotic trees and planted more of the indigenous trees to bring it back to its original form. Then looking at it, because at that particular time I was not really in need of farming or doing anything, I thought the best thing is to give it back to the society as a park. So it is a park where people can come and sit down there, enjoy themselves, and it gives me a lot of satisfaction and my family that we can be able to give back to the society.
When I first read your book, Living on the Edge, I may forget a lot, but there's just one part that I remember. You talked about chicken not being African. At the first time chicken was, I mean, somebody came with chicken to Nyeri. This person was almost cast out of the community. Would you just like to share this a bit with people?
I think first of all, let me say that for people who do not know about our evolving in Africa, any animal you find that is tamed animal is not African.
Any tamed animal is not African.
Cow, goat,
sheep,
and pigs, all those ones,
chicken. But nowadays Africans are taming
not.
almost everything. We're even taming lions.
But that's what happens, is that you end up adopting things and making them yours. You even see the witch doctors
taming
sacrificing some of the chicken with the chicken, doing ceremonies, but they are not. If you look at way of understanding why they are not African, you first of all go back to the history of the migration, and you find that the cows, for example, were tamed. All animals, without an exception, were all wild in the beginning. But in the cultures where people found it very difficult to survive during winters, during the cold months, they developed the art of taming animals so that they can have food during the winters. In Africa, we did not need to tame animals. First of all, it's also important for us to understand that when you look at the population in those days, maybe about 200, 300 years ago, the population of the world was very small.
True.
So even at the turn of the century, if you look at a book written by a guy called Misage, I think Kenya's population at 1900 was about 300,000
people.
That's all.
Because at the time of independence we were
about 6 million, 8 million, yeah.
Oh,
so people have to understand that even when you say, how are we living and how are we? It is first of all important to appreciate that we were very few. So in theory, you can argue that everybody owned the district in terms of the size. So you could go very far without finding another human being. But people, if you look at the history of human beings, they have always been on the move. So that if there is drought in one place, they'll move to another place.
It's human nature.
It's human nature.
Look for a good place.
They will always move. So even this thing you're finding about people in Sahel moving to Europe, it's not new. People will move. It is to do with the migration whenever the human being feels threatened, or sometimes they have conflict and they move to another place. We have always been on the move. That is a fact.
Okay.
If you look at the community of the Luos in Western Kenya, they came all the way from the Sudan, coming down. And probably there were fights between two brothers, and the guy says, I'm going to start another home somewhere else, and they start moving. And then they find there's another place they can be able to look after their either livestock, or they can find some more food to eat. If you look at the Bantus, and you take them, if you accept the hypothesis that they started somewhere in Cameroon, just near the border with Nigeria, and spread towards the east, you can see the way they dominated the whole area from the equator now all the way to South Africa.
True.
It's 90% Bantus. It's the same stock of people. So we have always been on the move. So that is not unusual. So it's important to understand that when we started now having communities coming to Africa, those who came from the Caucasian and places like India, coming backwards, we had gotten out before, and then they were coming back again, looking for better pastures. Coming along the Nile, that is where the domesticated animals came through.
Okay.
Cows, it is estimated is between about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, which is a very short time in terms of human history.
Yeah.
And one way of telling that an animal did not evolve in a place is the way it has problems with the stress. Like a cow in the hotter areas, you cannot keep a cow. They suffer from stress, heat stress, because they are not really originally from a hot place. They are from a cooler place. The other point is that it's the design of the hooves. If you keep all the tamed livestock like goats, like sheep and the rest, you find that they actually destroy the environment a lot in Africa. Because Africa is relatively a dry continent. So the design of the hooves of those animals is such that they evolved in a place that is wet, so that they can be able to anchor themselves better. When they come to Africa, it cuts down on the vegetation.
True.
So that is why if you have overgrazing, you find wherever there are goats, it will become destroyed. The ground gets destroyed, you get erosion. So if you're having more animals, because of the way the hooves are designed. Yet, if you go to a national park today, and even if you find a huge herd of buffaloes, and they are walking around, you find that the grass does not get destroyed. Because the hooves are designed, or they evolved from this particular continent.
Okay.
The other thing is that if you find an animal that you brought into Africa, where it found different types of diseases, you have to support it.
Okay.
So that is why you find you have to spray a cow, you have to spray a goat, you have to inject the chicken. We don't go to the bush and inject the impala. We don't inject the zebras. They're always looking very healthy. It's because they have evolved in a dry type of a continent. So you don't have that. The other point you find is that you need to support the animals that you brought, like those tame animals, with water. Because the places they came from has plenty of water. So when they have a plenty of water, they have no problems. Yet, if you take the African animals, nobody puts water for them. They'll find the little water, they're able to even get some of the moistures from the leaves, and they'll survive, and they're okay. In fact, there are certain antelopes in Africa, like the gerenuk or gerenuk, that nobody has ever observed it drinking water. It doesn't drink water. It is able to extract the moisture and use it very, very efficiently from the leaves, from the vegetation, and from the dew, but it will not do it. If you look at the droppings of a cow, they are normally very wet. So it is very wasteful in terms of the water. If you look at the African animals, most of them have little pellets when they drop. They have extracted every amount of water.
Yes.
It has very little water in it. That is issues of evolution.
Okay.
That's the way animals have evolved and have been able to continue living in this dry continent, while those animals which had plenty did not need to develop to evolve in a way that they need to conserve water. Because
let me bring back the people who are watching and listening right now, because as we keep on conversing, a lot is coming out. Now just the imagination that currently Nairobi is about 6 million people. That is the population of Kenya at the time of independence. And now try to imagine that in the early 1900s, it was just about 300,000 people. That shows you just how much, what is happening in the world and how population is growing so fast, and why so many people are now putting their best also to make sure that we are conserving what we have. Then also, this brings me back to the question that I was asking about chicken. I realized that, for example, like the Kikuyu community, fish is not really something that people see there as food compared to places like where we come from, Kisumu. Do the Kikuyu community have a history with fish?
That's a very interesting question, because for a very long time, the Kikuyus and Maasais interacted for many hundreds of years. And a lot of customs that were picked up by the by the Kikuyus were actually Maasai customs, which is the they come from a stock of Nilo Hamites. Maasais are the people who came through the Egypt coming down. And they also picked up a lot of old Egyptian type of customs where there was all this thing about eating only cows. So they came up with a lot of restrictions on what you can eat and what you cannot eat. So even if you look at the age groups of the Kikuyus, it's very much mirrored in the same structure as the way the Maasais do up to today. Issues like circumcision was not a Bantu custom. It actually came with the Nilo Hamites. The Bantus were not circumcising people. So it came through Egypt.
That is interesting to hear, because now sometimes I look at how we, the stereotypes in the country, when for example the people from the Kikuyu community maybe tend to see that those from Luo community don't circumcise, and then they say, no, they circumcise. Then now here you are saying that it was not really like Kikuyu.
No, those are people who think in a micro way. But if you look at it from a historical point of view, customs of circumcision, the circumcision practice is started in a place in southern Egypt. And it is spread as they also conquered other communities and interacted with other communities. But it is not in itself a custom that was a Bantu custom. That's why some of the Bantus don't circumcise too in other places. And it was not part of it. It's a very new thing. And it's not an old type of custom. But like any culture, things evolve. There's no culture that is static. And most of it is affected by other cultures. So if you look at now the eating of the fish, the one you're asking, there were a lot of interesting kind of almost what you call the African religious doctrines of what you should eat and what you should not eat. And most of it really came with the Maasai. Talking about we are the people of the cattle. So in theory, what the Maasais talk about, or the Nilo Hamites talk about, that the cows are theirs, there is some truth in it. Because the migration from the north coming down was actually led by the Nilo Hamites. So when they came and interacted with other communities, the other communities started having the cows, because it was easier as the population started growing to have a cow rather than to go and hunt. You were assured more of the food having a tame animal. And that's how we got the animals that are tame. But having said that, even when we have the tame animals, people have to understand, you have to look after the tame animal different from a wild animal, because it did not evolve in this continent. Therefore the diseases, the ticks, the lack of water, the weather will affect it. So if you go, for example, in places like West Africa, where there is a lot of heat, you'll find that almost about 300 kilometers to the coast, there are no cows. They can put goats, but not cows, because they will suffer from heat stress. So even in this country, there are certain places,
like in the northern Kenya,
you cannot put it. What has happened is that even the cows have adapted themselves. So we have different breeds of cows that can do well in certain areas. But that element of being a stranger in this continent has not fully evolved to become African.
But there
are some evolving that have them, that because of that staying here, have developed resistance. So there are some that have more resistance than others. But if you take a cow now from like Norway and bring it here, it will surely die.
It will die. Could you explain, recently I watched on Al Jazeera, I don't know whether my friends here watched, India is trying to reintroduce the big five in their wild. So they took some, I think, leopards from Africa, and some years later now,
it seems cheetahs.
Like, actually cheetahs. Now it looks like all the cheetahs are slowly dying, and they're saying it is becoming so difficult even to adapt.
If you go to the cheetahs, the wild animals, I mean, there are a lot of other hypotheses about the the wild animals. The cheetahs as an animal is probably one of the most delicate animals to survive. It is theorized that it is possible that at one time only a pair of cheetahs survived in the world. So the cheetahs you see have come from that couple. And one of the things that makes people believe that is because the genetic makeup of the cheetah is very narrow. Today, if you have a cheetah that has got a problem that needs grafting, where you take a skin from another animal to it, and you take a cheetah from Namibia and you put it on a cheetah in Kenya, it will accept. Telling you that genetically they are very close to each other. What that means also is that the survival, if there is an epidemic, they can also be wiped out very easily.
Just as fast
They're
as
very
they run.
delicate, yes, as fast as they run. Because it means that they don't have a kind of variable that make one cheetah different from another. So they can pick one disease and the other picks. Having said that, if it was not, and this is mainly because of the human encroachment into the animal's environment, the cheetahs were found in Asia. So even today, there are cheetahs, I think, in Iran. And those are cheetahs from there. They may have a small differences in terms of genetic makeup, but it is not as vast as it is with the other animals. So where they are introducing the cheetahs, like in India, they used to be there. Leopards used to be there. And there are certain type of animals that were in all the continents that you can find them in different places. So where they're reintroducing like the cheetahs in Asia, they can. What they did is that recently, you mentioned about the cheetahs. Unfortunately, I think all the cheetahs that were introduced recently have all died.
Yeah.
And the reason is, again, the environment. It's possible they cannot take certain stresses because of staying again in Africa. They have adapted and they are able to stay in a certain environment. You move them to a place where the climate changes and they disappear. So there are many things like human beings we don't know about. So there are certain animals that are around everywhere. And if you look at it in terms of the way the planet has been evolving and itself, there's some animals that were there before some of the splits of the continent was there. So if you, for example, you look at crocodiles, you find crocodiles in Australia and you find crocodiles in Africa. Warm places, much attached to the animals that are around us. We saw them as part of us. So some of the animals that we do not eat is because we see them as our spirit residing in those particular animals. But in terms of the fish, it is because of that narrow culture of the Nilohemites, where they put a lot of restrictions from like taboos in what would happen to you if you ate other types of animals.
And actually, I've also heard this from our community, the Luo community. It's not just about what you can eat, but even what parts of certain animals that should only be eaten by certain people. So, for example, when you talk about jogo, yeah, so let me use that because I think most people will relate with this. So we see general, yes, the cock is also seen as a very sacred animal. And because people also say, even in the Bible, it had to crow 3 times for Peter to realize that, he was betraying Jesus. For our community, even, it is something that usually is served for the in-laws, for example. And even when it is cooked, there's some part, I know my little friends watching will tell you, there's some part of chicken that women were not allowed to eat for a certain period of time. So for example, like the backbone, what we call oguro. For women, you're not supposed to eat it. In fact, when it is cooked in a house, it's only a man that should be served that. So I really understand what you're talking about all this story, and this also really makes me feel so happy and proud to be African, because there are so many things that we identify with. And maybe straight even before we come back to the issue of naming, because this is straightly flowing into that, Africans, animals, and the association with these animals. Is this something that also you've seen also in your life?
Yeah. I have lived in West Africa, which probably has much more attachment to the traditions. And probably even some of the people in Kenya, like in Western Kenya, have a lot to do with the tradition than places that had major trauma from colonialism, like Central Kenya. So they have kept certain customs, and you need to go back and find out what that means, how we connect with animals. And one of them is like what I talked about, the totems. Totems being that animal, or it could even be a river, that is supposed to protect the well-being of a certain clan or a certain community. So when you look at that particular animal, you revere it. It is an animal that is supposed to bring good luck. Ordinarily, you would not eat that particular animal. And one of the things in my own travel that I found is that it is possible that in our own DNA, we still carry that African religion in us. Because if you go to the Western world, when they shot a lion or they shot an animal, they normally hang it in their houses as beauty. So if you go to most of the people of the Western world, when they were doing the hunting, they would cut the head of a buffalo, then dry it and mount it on the wall. But if you go to most of the African houses, you'll never find a dead animal hanging on a wall. And my own interpretation is that because of our religious attachment to the animals, being the custodians of our own spiritual well-being, there is no fundamental difference between an animal and your brother. Even if you loved your brother very much, if he died, you will not cut his head and hang it there and be looking at it every day. So we do not get joy in looking at dead things that have been mounted on a wall. It is spiritually repugnant to us to look at that. And I think it is important for people to understand why sometimes you don't like something. It's probably right in our DNA that because of that cultural background and our upbringing and our attachment to the animals, you do not see any beauty in that. I have gone to many homes, some of them to pretend to put, because they were under colonialism, they want to put a stuffed lion on the side. But when people come there, they don't jump at it and say how beautiful it is. It's like it is kind of, it's odd. It's not something you look at it and say, this is fantastic. We don't see beauty in dead animals. That's not us. So it is better to deal with them by watching them, so that if my clan, for example, like my grandmother told me, was zebra, then that particular zebra, I just admire it and I can protect it.
Your name means zebra?
My name, Jagi, means zebra.
Oh, okay.
It's a male zebra. Yeah.
Okay.
So now, when we were talking about, then we go back to these animals that have been brought up. There's a point which you raised, which probably needs a bit more of clarification. One of them is that when people say that this part should not be eaten by women and this should be done by men, that is much more of a control thing. because the men were the one in charge of homesteads,
Okay.
they tried to create a mystery around certain things so that they can have those particular meat without any competition.
Men will always be men.
Yes. And there is a lot of that kind of a thing of why customs, some of the what we call negative customs today evolved. They were much more to control. Even circumcision of women and the rest. All those kind of things.
Let me just cut you short before you
Yeah.
go. So from our community, one of the stories that I was told, for a woman who eats the backbone of a chicken, by time you start suffering from, you start feeling some pain on your backbone. So you are likely not to be walking upright in the future. You see now, these kind of stories which are created now actually to control certain things. And I like now the angle that you're bringing.
Those are narratives that are created so that
Exactly.
you don't compete.
Exactly. And also when you talk about associating human characters and animals, I'll keep on referring to my community because I think everyone watching, you have all these stories. So if you're young and clever, we always say, as clever as a rabbit,
Yes.
or as hare. If sometimes you have certain behaviors.
Yes.
If you are a cunning person, we associate you with a certain animal. If you are, let's say, somebody, a glutton, we associate you with a hyena, what we call fisi. But please do not the discrimination that we know of fisi today. The young people of today know what we mean by fisi. When we say somebody is fisi, now this is somebody who likes going after all women and, ladies. So that's now we call fisi. But the fisi we are talking about is the hyena. If you are like a tough person and a warrior, we'll call you Sibur.
Yes.
Sibur now is the lion. And if you are powerful, all these manner of things. And actually that's also what is coming from you, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what we were talking about is that some of these animals now we have adopted as part of our own life, like chicken. It's very recent. Like I was saying, that when I did my own research, I found out that in a place like Nyeri, in a little place, Mukurweini, the first time they saw a chicken was 1913.
Wow. 1913.
Yeah, 1913.
That's like 100 and
that chicken was brought in by an Islamized Kikuyu who was called Abdallah. The corruption word of the Kikuyu, they call it Wamodara. The real name when I did the research was a guy called Kamau Wakagembe. That was his real name. But when he brought it, people came from all villages, from far, from Muranga, from wherever, to see what they described that time as a bird that could not fly. So that's when they looked at it. And to them, for a very long time, because birds were not eaten traditionally by people, only boys could eat like birds when they are hunting and the rest. The chicken stayed for a very, very long time. People not eating chicken in the Kikuyu land. But then because they started interacting with the Europeans during colonialism, they were the first to eat chicken. But the women, I know very well, my grandmother would not have eaten chicken. My mother did not like chicken. And I'm talking about a much more modern lady by today's standards. But now it has become an everyday type of a menu. So people have created all stories about the chicken. But chicken is very, very recent.
And very, very sweet.
And very sweet, okay, fine, yeah. I don't think it is sweeter than some of the wild animals that we have, because it has come up with also a lot of other issues. The issues of cholesterol, the issues of, the things that you can be able to do. Chicken also has
and I think the person who made us start eating chicken, to some point also made a very big mistake, because now, as Africans, now we started going for any animal that looks like chicken in the bush. The
I
guinea
think
fowls.
even that time, let me put it this way.
Yeah.
If you look at the Africans themselves, the communities that were in what you call marginalized areas, they created a narrative why you should eat wild animals. So those did hunt. So for example, if you look at the background of the Kikuyus and the Kambas, they came from the same stock. But the Kambas went to a drier area. But the Kambas were eating wild animals because in their place, it is dry area. You need to create a narrative that you can eat wild animals. But when you have plenty, you can create a narrative that those animals should not be eaten.
True.
So for example, among the Kikuyus, if you ate, you were known to have eaten wild animals, you could not participate in ceremonies of the community. And if you had to participate in those ceremonies, you had to go through a cleansing process.
Because of eating wild animals.
Because of eating wild animals. So a person who was eating wild animals was put in the same class as lepers. He could not or she could not. If you were known, you were a nobody. You could not interact with the other members of the community. But if you want to call it arrogance, of the communities that restricted people from eating wild animals, 100%, you can see that they also had plenty of livestock. So they did not suffer from not having meat, so to speak. Having said that, like I said, even the cows were not originally African. So if you go through our own historical way, we started as hunters and gatherers. There was no agriculture. There was no livestock. So we hunted. And remember, that time the population was small. We were probably living in caves everywhere in the world before we evolved to the next level. So as the population become more, and you're getting the challenge of how to feed them, you start creating other narratives of how to do it. Let me give you an example of one of these, the way the narrative was done. It's my father who was telling me, if you look at the Mugumo tree, which is sacred among the Kikuyus, it is what they call the strangler fig. Among the ficus trees, there are many ficus, sycamore, those kind of type of figs. But the strangler fig, normally what it does is that seeds sometimes is dropped on a tree by a bird, and then it starts growing. And then it strangles the tree that is hosting it. So what normally happens is it leaves a lot of, when that tree dies, a lot of hollow areas. So what he used to do, and this is a story from my father, he took me to one which is still there, near Mukurweini, which is a protected tree, where they used to have those sacrifices. There always used to be very smart people in communities. How do you keep the communities together? So what they used to do is to argue that that is where God lives.
Okay.
So if you have to do sacrifices, you have to do sacrifices around the Mugumo tree. So when my father took me around, he showed me the holes that were there. And most of those holes would be hosting mongooses or monkeys or leopards, animals that can eat. So what the clever people knew is that they would do the sacrifices around there. And when they left the meats around, they were eaten by those animals. They would come the following day and they would say that gods have eaten them. That is a story that in every community. How we do the community, how we sacrifice, and we come to check whether the gods has accepted our prayers. And if the God has accepted our prayers, the communities come. They're happy.
Okay.
Those guys were also very, very smart. They could tell about the winds.
So actually it was not the gods coming, it was the wild animals living around this area that would come and...
Maybe the gods came through the monkeys, or through the mongoose, or through the leopards.
Or maybe it was the God's ways of making sure that you are feeding the wild animals.
That's a story for another day. But that's the way it was. There were always very smart people on how to keep the community together. So that you would then create a narrative. So the sacrifice has been up. They know very well that time, they can tell the rains are not far. The winds are bringing in whatever. And within about 3 days, the rains would come. And people would be all at peace.
Wahenga.
But the Mugumo tree is a strangler fig with a lot of holes. Some of them you can even go in and out, even now. But the whole thing was that it is a place where it hosted a lot of other animals that could come and eat those things. So if today you wanted to say that God came and ate the meat which was left on the ground, it's okay to believe, because most of the religions, they are dogmas. You don't question. When the major priest says this is the way it is, they even tell you that to question those things, you're going to put yourself into more problems.
True.
So don't question. Accept the way it is. And it is normally done by very smart, clever people, so that you can hold the communities together.
True. Mr. Jagi, just to bring this conversation on the animals to an end, let me ask you today, if some of the domesticated animals were not domesticated and they were in the forest, this one was just on a lighter note, which of these animals would be one of maybe would be one of the most dangerous animals in the jungle? Among the ones that would be domesticated, from your experience with the animals, the goat, the sheep, cows.
One of the things they talk about, the big five. Do you know where the big five comes from? Do you know?
Maybe from your side, maybe just share.
Okay, fine. The big five is not an old concept, but maybe it has relevance to the old way of the way we were living. These are the animals the hunters said are very dangerous to them.
Okay.
The big five. That is why you found that they have the lion. Because if you shoot the lion and you don't shoot it properly, when you're doing the hunting, and I'm talking about the colonial groups that were doing the hunting, it will come back to you. It will kill you. If it is a buffalo, it will come back to you. It will kill you if you're not careful. If it is an elephant, it will do that. The other animal which is very dangerous is the leopard. Leopards will kill you. They are very smart. And the fifth one is?
The rhino, right?
The rhino. Because it will charge you and it will pierce. The other animals tend to run away. So when you talk about the animals that you should be worried about and what you should not be worried about, I think the hunters did tell us, and even if you look at today's Africa, the animals that kill most people are those five. I think there could be a sixth one, like the crocodile. But the crocodile, you need to be...
Or even the hippo.
Even the hippo.
Yeah. So
even the hippo.
Mr. Jagi, maybe just back to my question, because I just want to see, based on your experience with animals, like the ones we've domesticated, is there one animal that you usually look at and say, it is good we domesticated this animal? If this animal is left in the jungle, this animal will be very dangerous. Some of these animals that we keep at home.
Okay, first of all, the animals that were sophisticated long time ago have even lost their evolutionary way of protecting themselves. In other words, if you look at a wild animal, you'll find that it camouflages with the environment that it's in, so that it can be able to survive. But once you start removing the, what do you call it, when you remove the need for an animal to feel like it is well, it starts losing the colors. So that is why you find that cows have all types of colors, or goats have all types of colors. But yet, when you look at a zebra, or you look at an impala, they have the same color. Because in terms of protection, they live in an environment that they must camouflage with the environment. They must be able to survive in that particular environment from predators. Not only man, but even other predators. But once it loses the mentality of being wild, it kind of also starts changing even in the colors. But so if you go back in terms of the animals that were tamed in those days, I think there are animals that have gone through so many cycles of domestication that they have lost their original look, the way they look like. And those are like cows, like the goats, like the sheep. And then man has come in and then started even doing breeding and interfering, so to speak, with nature and trying to upgrade them because they are using them for commercial purposes. So it is possible that a cow of those days, which had big horns and the rest, was probably a very dangerous animal because it was very much like a buffalo, a wild cow.
In fact, most of the time I usually ask myself, does the cow really know the strength that it has? Because I don't think this rope that we used to tie the cow, I think it's about mentality, right?
It's because
that rope cannot.
It's because it was domesticated. Once you domesticate an animal, then you become the controller of it. It loses those instincts of its own survival. It now has only what you call the basic instincts. That's why the cat, for example, if it catches a mouse, it will kill it the same way a lion kills an animal. To do it by suffocation. It will hold it. It has not lost that instinct of knowing how to kill. But the other things of knowing how to protect itself, it doesn't have it. So there are certain basic things that you'll not lose, but at the same time, it will retain very little. It continues losing. So even if you look at these wild animals where people are now domesticating things like elephants, buffaloes, it's only that they have not gone through very many cycles. But when they have gone through many cycles, they become docile. They don't they don't become aggressive. They become, you have seen the buffaloes in places like India and Asia, where they are used to work. They're just like any other cow.
True.
But if you find a wild buffalo, even in Asia, it will kill you. The same thing with elephants. They tame the elephants. They are the ones pulling the logs and the rest. A huge animal, it has lost that appreciation of being under threat. But if you find a wild elephant, it will kill you. It will react just like a wild animal. So I think it is a question of the stage at which the domestication has reached in an animal that tells you whether it is safe or not safe. So if, for example, like my friend somewhere on near Athi River had tamed cheetahs, and one day he came back and they attacked him. He had to be taken to Nairobi hospital, and he could not understand why these cheetahs were babies and whatever. It's because they have not gone through. They have still retain a lot of natural instinct in them, and you don't know when they will snap. And different animals have been seen to have different levels of being being able to be domesticated. So, for example, they say one animal you cannot domesticate is a crocodile. It will still eat you. So don't put it as a pet and start sleeping with it. It will just chew you. That kind of thing. There are some animals that will not change. They are difficult to change.
Okay, interesting. I think for everyone who is watching, this is quite an interesting story, and we want to take a break from this point. As you digest this, just how much do you know about animals, and how much did you know about the relation that we have with these animals? And did you know that most of the domesticated animals are actually we were not having these animals with us in our homesteads before? Let's take a short break. We'll be back shortly with the namings. Don't run away.